What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In this video today I want to briefly and casually talk about why I'm still using Linux. So let us get right into it. Alright, so as I mentioned, this is going to be more of a casual video, so it's not going to be very structured. I do have a couple of points I want to cover here, but primarily it's going to be me just randomly talking, randomly yapping about Linux and my experience with it. I want to focus on why I didn't switch back to Windows at some point, why I don't think about switching back to Windows, and why I don't think that I will switch back to Windows at some point in the future. I want to talk about my experience with Linux, primarily to give a lot of you people a perspective on what it is like to use Linux full time. I'm not going to explain like all the details, but I want to maybe get rid of some preconceived notions people might have about Linux, that you have to troubleshoot every day, that you have to constantly, be coding on the system and customizing things. It is not like that. It is like that in the beginning, and I just want to share my process here and my experience with using Linux for almost 1.5 years now. I posted this on May 22nd, so almost 1.5 years ago. And to be precise here, I'm using Pop OS, so I'm gonna run. Now I have a reason to run this. I run this all the time, but now I have a reason to do that. Here's my NeoFetch. I run Pop OS 22.04. The reason for that is primarily compatibility. You can see I have an NVIDIA GPU, and Pop OS is just, easy to set up, and it's basically Ubuntu with compatibility and a couple of things that I like here. So I'm using Pop OS. I didn't really distro hop much. I did do a lot of distro hopping when I was younger and just playing around with Linux, but I didn't distro hop since I'm using Linux full time. I just like my system the way it is. It's stable, it works. I don't have to, troubleshoot, and I don't have a lot of issues that I want to, try to get rid of by switching the operating system. So what is the main reason I'm not switching back to Windows? The main reason is I don't have a reason to switch back to Windows. So when I was switching to Linux from Windows, I had a lot of things that annoyed me. I was using Pop OS and I saw, okay, it doesn't work like I'm used to. It doesn't work the way I'm used to having it work. I have to do different things. I have to use different keybinds. I have to approach things with a different perspective or strategy. I have to use different tools. Things don't work the way I'm used to them working. And that was the main reason why for a long time I was trying to go to Linux, but then I wanted to go back to Windows. It was just this habit, this comfort, this convenience of knowing or of having things work the way they always worked. And the reason I don't switch back to Windows now is because I'm past this. I don't really miss anything about Windows, anything at all in terms of how the operating system works. And switching back to Windows would actually have the same effect now that switching to Linux had in the beginning, that I would have to get used to using Windows again. And it would annoy me that things don't work the way they work on Linux. This includes keybinds, this includes directories, this includes ways in which certain things are handled. For example, right now, if I want to do something with a process, I just open up the terminal and type btop. And I use this tool here to handle my processes and tasks. Now, this was annoying to me in the beginning because I was used to using the Task Manager or Process Explorer. I wanted to open up one of the two tools, and I didn't want to use the command line. Now, if I'm on Windows, I'm very frustrated that I can't use btop to handle my processes, that I have to use something like Process Explorer or Task Manager. I just don't like this. And I would say, interestingly, that the discomfort that I would have now when getting used to Windows again is much larger than the discomfort I had when getting used to Linux. So the switch from Windows to Linux was easier than it would be now to switch to Windows. So that convenience, this comfort, this familiarity with the operating system is something I now have with Pop OS, with Linux, with Ubuntu-based distributions that I don't have on Windows. And I know that because I do have a Windows installation on a second hard drive. You can see here I have a Windows folder. So this actually is a Windows hard drive that I can connect to here on Linux. And I use Windows for actually only two reasons, and I almost never boot into Windows, like almost never. The only reason why I ever boot into Windows is for gaming, which I don't do too often. So occasionally I will play Counter-Strike, which I could actually get done on Linux as well, because Counter-Strike is a game that you could also play on Linux very well because it's from Valve, and Valve always tries to make everything Linux compatible. But I actually do prefer to have my system separated, so I like it that I have a Windows for not a Windows, a hard drive, a system for working, and a hard drive and a system for games and entertainment, you could say. I mean, I do watch YouTube on Linux, but in general, I like it that I have to restart and boot into a different operating system to do gaming. It feels like there are separate environments for that. But besides that, I don't game a lot, so I will play maybe Counter-Strike once a week, once every 2 weeks. It's not a lot. It's not. I don't play often. So that's one reason for why I boot into Windows. And maybe for some games, occasionally I don't play it anymore, but I played League of Legends a while ago. And for that, I do have to boot into Windows. So there is a necessity there. Besides that, the only reason I ever boot into Windows at all is if I have to handle some document format that is too complex for Linux because it's proprietary. For example, if I have some Excel file that I get from a customer, from a client, or I get it from some source and it is more complicated, it has some more advanced stuff in it, and the only Office suite that I use here for compatibility is not enough to handle this, what I do then is I just boot into Windows and use my Excel. It happens once, twice a year, something like this. It doesn't happen very often. The other thing is if I have some PDF file, or some PDF that I have to, sign, or that I have to fill out, and for some reason the compatibility with all the other readers other than Adobe doesn't work very well, then I would boot into Windows maybe. But besides that, I never use Windows. And every time I boot into Windows, I'm frustrated. I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the way it feels. I don't like the way things are done. I don't like the way that the keybinds work and that I can't change them to a large part. I enjoy Linux much more. And all the inconvenience of having to do things differently on Linux, it's now reversed. Now I would have to have the inconvenience of doing them the Windows way. There are small things that maybe work better on Windows. It's in a lot of ways more compatible with hardware and with stuff in general. So sometimes things will just work easier on Windows, but that's not really a big issue for me because I don't use any special hardware that has problems on Linux. And also, I would say things would look very differently if I would rely on the Adobe suite, because the Adobe suite has very good software if you need it. I don't need it. I edit my videos with Shotcut. So I don't rely on any Adobe products. I don't use any graphic software or anything like that. I don't use any special advanced software that's not available for Linux. And I need to say that at this point, and this might get me a lot of hate, even from myself, but I think that if I really had to rely on these things, if you really force me to use Adobe products and I can't use Linux anymore because I need the compatibility, my first instinct now actually would be to switch to Mac. I have never used a Mac. I have never used Apple products at all. I saw them and I know about them, but I did not ever use it as my daily driver. I didn't ever, code on a MacBook for a long time or anything like that. And because of that, I don't really have the experience. Maybe I tried and I hate it, but for me, a MacBook is way more interesting now than going back to Windows. Why? Because it's still proprietary, it's still very closed and not very customizable. It's not the hacky Linux kind of way that I like, but it's Unix based. It has a strong terminal. It has homebrew. It has this environment, this ecosystem, this feel. It's not Windows. It feels like a corporate closed Linux. It feels like a closed source, compatible, optimized corporate Linux. And I think that I would like that more than Windows now. I'm not sure about this, maybe I'm wrong about this, but my first instinct, if I really had to use MS Office and Adobe Suite on a regular basis, I would probably get a Mac and not go back to Windows. That's just a thought. So I don't know how long this video is going to be. I'm just going to yap, as I said. So if you're not interested in that, just turn it off. I'm just going to talk a little bit here. But that's the main reason I don't switch back to Windows. I don't need to. I don't have the necessity to do so. And I also really dislike the operating system, the way it works. And until I have some problems, I'm open-minded. If Linux crashes and if I see that I can't do certain things that I want to do, I'm going to go back to Windows or Mac. I'm going to switch again, or I'm going to try a different Linux distro. But up until now, I don't have that. The only thing that I was not able to resolve in terms of compatibility, but that's not really a compatibility issue, is that I was using DaVinci Resolve as my editing program. So this is a program that is more advanced in Shotcut. It also has, it's a professional software, let's put it that way, a professional editing software, and it has a free version. And on Windows, this works perfectly fine. On Linux, it also works, so I can also use DaVinci Resolve on Linux. The problem is, however, for some reason, and I don't know why, they say that certain codecs, certain encodings don't work on Linux in the free version. So it's not a compatibility issue. It does work, but you have to pay for it. But you don't have to pay for the same encodings on Windows. I don't know why that is the case, but I'm not going to pay for DaVinci Resolve. I just, I have very basic editing that I do with my videos. You know that, you notice that. So I'm not going to pay for editing software. And I'm definitely not going to pay if on Linux I have to pay and on Windows I don't have to pay. This is like a principle thing. I'm not going to do it just because you decide you're going to charge money on a different operating system for the same stuff, right? I don't know what the reasoning is behind that, but that's like the only thing that I wasn't able to resolve, and I switched to Shotcut for my editing software here. Besides that, I don't have any issues with any program, any compatibility stuff on Linux. Yeah, so what I want to say here is that I don't have the reason to switch to Windows. Now, one thing that I want to talk about, this is super important for me, is that people think that when you use Linux, even if you use something like Ubuntu or Pop OS, that you have to constantly troubleshoot and you have to constantly fix problems because this doesn't work and this is buggy and this crashes. And I will agree, it's that way in the beginning. I have a file here on my system, which is the Linux config steps txt, and this is a collection of all the things that I had to do. Why do I have this file? Because if I ever reinstall the system, if I ever install it somewhere else, I have to be able to just do the same stuff again without having to Google and troubleshoot again. So yes, there was a lot of problems. First of all, I wanted to have gpaste. I wanted to have multiple clipboards the same way I had them in Windows. I wanted to have the same key bindings. I had to set this up. I had to install all the themes. I had to set up custom key binds. I had audio issues that I had to fix. I described the process here, especially with Bluetooth. I wanted to know how to mount my Windows hard drive. I had to be able to run multiple Discord instances. I had to set the theme for my Ocular PDF reader. I had to set up the ability to scroll with the middle button of my mouse, at least by dragging. I wasn't able to do it the Windows way. I had to keep track of bug fixes here for gpaste. I had to learn how to set the font size in certain programs. This was a workaround here for DaVinci. This is some X server setting that I have to change when I record in OBS and so on. There are a bunch of things that I had to troubleshoot. So I don't want to deny that there is a lot of troubleshooting that comes with Linux, but it's only in the beginning, because I will tell you the last time I troubleshooted is quite a while ago. I don't know when exactly I did the last troubleshooting. If it was recent, it wasn't anything major. I don't remember anything. So my system just works. For the past, I would say 7, 8, 9 months, I didn't have any issues with my system. All of the stuff that I had to do in the beginning. And a lot of people like to say, Linux is great if you don't value your time. That's absolute nonsense. I would say that, yes, there is a certain investment of time in the beginning because you have to get your operating system to work. Yes, it's not plug and play most of the time. There will be issues. There will be stuff that you don't like, that you want to customize, that you want to set up in a different way, issues that you have to fix. But most of these issues can be fixed. Almost all of them can be fixed, in my opinion. And yes, in the beginning it takes time, but once you fix them, they're fixed. You don't have to spend time all the time. So I don't troubleshoot my system. I code, I record, I talk to people on Discord, I do stuff. I don't ever worry about sound. I don't ever worry about compatibility issues. I just do my stuff and it works because I set up the operating system in the beginning. So this argument that Linux takes time and it's constant troubleshooting, that's not true. It's that way in the beginning. It can be that way in the beginning. And the good thing about this is I actually like this because I learn a lot. I learn a lot while doing these things. And yes, they are annoying, but they can be resolved. And then you learn a lot while resolving them. So that's not really a con for me. That's a con in the beginning. That's maybe a barrier of entry, you could say, but I don't have this problem now using Linux as my daily driver. Um, yeah, and besides that, of course, there's like the obvious stuff. I enjoy working with a terminal. I do everything with a terminal. I install packages here. I remove packages here. I search packages here. I have NeoVim as my main editor for basically everything. If I open up a Python file, I do it like this. If I open up a config file, I do it like, not ncg, ncf. I do it like this. I have my NeoVim config here. Yes, it's still not Lua based. I know I need to change that. But my whole operating system is based around, or my whole workflow is based around the terminal. I code in the terminal. I do a lot of stuff in the terminal. And I don't feel comfortable doing that on Windows. So there are many reasons for why I don't like Windows. I don't want to make this a pro-con list now. I do think I also have a video on pros and cons, or is Linux better for development or something like this. This is not a video where I want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about the pros and cons, like Linux being open source and customizable and all that. It's more like why I don't switch. And I think the only reason to switch to Windows is if you need software that only runs on Windows, or if you have some major compatibility issues. I don't think that it's a good reason to say Linux costs more time. It costs more time initially. I understand if you don't switch to Linux now because you think that you don't have the ability to invest all the time into troubleshooting, and that's fine. But I don't think that this is a long-term thing. So you don't get into this loop of constantly having to bug fix and troubleshoot. That's not my experience with Linux. It happens when you try something new, maybe. So it's not a plug and play system oftentimes, but it gets better over time. And I don't think that's an issue. So again, this is not a sales pitch for Linux. You don't have to use Linux if you don't want to. I'm just sharing my experience because I think a lot of people want to switch to Linux, but they feel like it's stupid because you have to constantly troubleshoot and things don't work. My recommendation is if you want to switch to Linux, give it a serious try, which means don't try it for a week, don't try it for a day, and see that you have to troubleshoot all the time. Try it for half a year, for 1 year. Because what you're going to see is you're going to do a lot of troubleshooting in the beginning. You're going to have a text file like me with all the things that you did, and then it's going to work. And then you're going to not miss Windows because you're going to now like the Linux way of doing things. And you're going to go back to Windows and you're going to see that Windows is actually doing it in a way that you don't prefer. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. Again, this is not a sales pitch for Linux. The only thing is I don't want, or I want to prevent people from not trying to switch to Linux because they think that they will always have to troubleshoot and they will never get used to it. If that's the reason you don't switch to Linux, I would recommend you do it. Otherwise, do what you want, decide on your own. But I don't think that that's a good reason to not try Linux. Now, one last quick thing that I forgot to mention when recording the video yesterday, so I'm adding it afterwards, is do you know that feeling when you want to install some application or some game maybe, and you have to see, does it work on Linux? How does it work on Linux? What's the workaround? What's the special installation process? It's like when you do it on Linux, there's always these extra steps. And what I feel is that on Windows, it's the same way with developer stuff. So if you have some developer tools, some command line tools, some package managers, some libraries, installing them on Linux is oftentimes super easy. Doing it on Windows is oftentimes not supported or needs a workaround or a special mechanism or some virtualization, or you have to use WSL in something like this. So the same thing, the same issue that you have with business applications or with games on Linux, I think you have with developer tools on Windows. Now, I don't have a huge list of examples here, but one thing that comes to mind here is Ollama. Now, nowadays it works, but in the beginning, when I made a video about Ollama, the problem was that if you wanted to use it on Windows, you had to use the WSL. Now I think there's an executable file, but in the beginning it was only available for Linux and Mac. And this is something that happens quite often with developer tools or with command line tools, with anything that goes into the direction of computer science and development. Linux and Mac usually have a very easy process of installing and setting up, and on Windows you oftentimes have to do some stuff around it. So this is just one thing that I wanted to mention here. This compatibility issue or this extra work issue, you also have it on Windows when it comes to developer stuff. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting a like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you for watching, see you in the next video, and bye.